Peter, thanks very much indeed. You're watching GMT here on BBC World News. We'll go back to our main story this hour. The UN has reported an improvement in the amount of international aid money being pledged to help victims of floods in Pakistan. At the same time, Islamic aid groups are meeting in Jeddah to discuss coordinating their donations. Well, I'm joined now here in the studio by George Grant from the Henry Jackson Society, and also in Washington we're joined by Dr. Akbar Ahmed, who's Chair of Islamic Studies at American University. Dr. Ahmed, if I could start with you, thanks very much for joining us. Why do you think there's been such a relatively slow, maybe lacklustre response, in particular from the United States, to helping Pakistan?
It's a very interesting question, and you need to put it in the context of what's happening here. Nature has not been very kind to the United States, typhoons, cyclones, hurricanes. And so people are preoccupied with their own catastrophes internally. They responded to Haiti, as you saw, with great generosity, as they traditionally do. Presidents went down, Hollywood stars went down to Haiti and camped there. Pakistan also raises some question marks in a lot of American minds. Unfortunately, in the media, it's been associated with extremism and violence and terrorism, and therefore the response could also be tempered by the fact that people wonder whether, in fact, they're aiding very indirectly militants, which is really tragic, because Americans really need to understand the catastrophe of biblical proportions that has hit Pakistan and its impact on the war on terror, because effectively General Petraeus will have to realign his strategy and policy.
So they're looking at it more than just a humanitarian issue. George Grant, if that is the perception, what do you see as the risk of Western donors simply not putting their hands in their pockets quickly enough?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that it's fair that there is a perception that corruption in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and extremism are serious problems. But I think that for Western countries, and indeed for the international community more broadly, to withhold the provision of aid on the back of that would be an ironic reaction, because I think the very real risk there will be to increase support for extremism in the regions most affected.
And other organisations will jump in, or simply the lack of Western support will turn people away?
It's not just lack of Western support. I think there's been a very significant lack of support from a number of countries, particularly India and actually many Muslim states. And the problem that we have here is there has to be a distinction made between the provision of assistance generally, broadly, which there can be very real concerns about how it's going to be distributed, and disaster relief, which is what we have here. And firstly, we have to understand that what is happening here is in an environment where there is very, poverty is extreme, suffering is extreme, underdevelopment is extreme. And there is a perception amongst ordinary people, whether fair or not, that the authorities and their international partners are in some way responsible for that. Then I think that the appeal of extremist ideologies who offer themselves as a solution to this is correspondingly increased.
Akbar Ahmed, do you think that is the case, that if this aid, or we can say if it doesn't come quickly, already it hasn't come quickly, but it does seem as if it's picking up now, is it too late? Are those other extremist groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda or whoever it might be, already cashing in on that chasm, if you like, in the funding?
I think we have to be more sophisticated in our analysis of what's happening in Pakistan. The scale of this thing is so huge that what happens next is really anyone's guess. Society is imploding in certain districts. Millions have not even been reached right now. So all the structures are collapsing. Now it could, and I hope I'm wrong, it could provoke an internal crisis leading to a martial law. It could have consequences for the army itself, which is the only organization at this moment which is functioning with a command and control structure intact. Because remember, the majority of the soldiers are from the Punjab, and the Punjab in many districts is like one long lake. So the soldiers are also affected by this.
Right, so let me just put it this way then. In a way, there's a real conundrum here, isn't there? Because it takes everybody's aid to resurrect the situation in Pakistan, and more some probably, and yet there's this clear political tension about allowing, as some Westerners would see it, the likes of Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, wherever, coming in and helping.
Well, I don't think Al-Qaeda is in any position to be helping very many people. They'll have to look out for themselves somewhere up in the hills. Right now, the people of Pakistan need assistance. It's simple as that. If it's coming from America or India or Afghanistan, it should be welcome. And at this moment in time, Pakistanis are going to respond exactly like this. Who is coming to their help? And therefore, I, in fact, have been pleading with Americans to be much more conscious. They're capable of helping on scale. They've got the helicopters and the troops and so on across the border in Afghanistan. This is the time to rush to Pakistan and really start winning hearts and minds, which they're quite capable of doing.
OK, Ahmed, thank you very much indeed. And George Grant, thanks very much for joining us. The clamour, clearly, more is still very much needed. You're watching GMT.